Good morning, students. Once again, I welcome you all on my YouTube channel. Today, we are going to resume the fifth chapter of the Flamingo. The name of the chapter is Indigo. It is written by Louis Fisher. So, I will resume the chapter from where we have stopped in the last video. In the last video, at the end of the video, we discussed that when the court in Motihari town, when reconvened, when sat together, the judge said that he would not deliver the judgment against Mahatma Gandhiji for several days. And meanwhile, he allowed Gandhiji to remain at liberty. So Rajendra Prasad, Brij Kishore Babu, Maulana Majrul Haq, and several other prominent lawyers had arrived from Bihar. So already Mahatma Gandhiji has telegraphed Rajendra Prasad to come from Bihar with the influent friends, and Rajendra Prasad he brought with him Brij Kishore Babu, Maulana Majrul Haq, and several other prominent lawyers to discuss about the injustice, discuss about the case of the injustice against the peasants of Champaran. They conferred with Gandhi. Conferred means they discussed. So the prominent lawyers they discussed with Gandhiji. What would they do? So what would they do if he was sentenced to prison? Gandhi asked. So Gandhiji asked to the prominent lawyers, those who came from Bihar, that what would they do if he was sentenced to prison? Why? The senior lawyer replied. The senior lawyer they were surprised when Mahatma Gandhi asked to them what they would do. So they asked for the reason. The senior lawyer they had come to advise and help him. So the lawyer replied that they had come to advise and help Mahatma Gandhiji. If he went to jail, there would be nobody to advise and they would go home. So the lawyers, prominent lawyers like Rajendra Prasad, Brij Kishore Babu, Maulana Majrul Haq, and other prominent lawyers, they replied to Mahatma Gandhiji that if Mahatma Gandhiji went to jail, then they would go home because there would be nobody to advise and help. So, hearing the answer from the prominent lawyers, Mahatma Gandhiji was surprised. He asked, what about the injustice to sharecroppers? So Gandhi demanded that what about the injustice to the sharecroppers? What would they do for them? Because Mahatma Gandhiji was fighting for the sharecroppers. The lawyers withdrew to consult. Withdrew means they moved away to consult. Rajendra Prasad has recorded the upshot of their consultation. Upshot means outcome. So Rajendra Prasad has recorded the outcome of their consultation, discussion. They discuss when Mahatma Gandhiji demanded that what would they do against the injustice to the sharecroppers. So they were compelled to discuss. They thought among themselves that Gandhi was totally a stranger and yet he was prepared to go to prison for the sake of peasants. If they, on the other hand, being not only residents of the adjoining district, but also those who claim to have served this peasant, should go home, it would be a shameful desertion. So, the prominent lawyers they discussed among themselves that even though Gandhiji was totally a stranger, yet he was ready to go to prison for the sake of the peasants, because the peasants were not his relatives, they were not his friends, but still Mahatma Gandhiji was ready to go to jail. On the other hand, they were not only the residents of the neighboring district, nearby district, but also some of them even claimed to have served these peasants as a lawyer. Should go home. So if they go home, then it will be a shameful desertion. Desertion means abandoning, living without support. So they should be ashamed of themselves that they would leave the peasants without giving them justice. They accordingly went back to Gandhi and told him they were ready to follow him into jail. So they realized their mistake and they went back to Mahatma Gandhiji and they told him that they were ready to go to jail with him, with Mahatma Gandhiji. The battle of Champaran is won, he exclaimed. Mahatma Gandhiji, while looking at the spirit of the lawyers, Mahatma Gandhiji told them that the battle of Champaran is won because the lawyers were with the peasants. They showed the unity. Then he took a piece of paper and divided the group into pairs and put down the order in which each pair was to court arrest. So Mahatma Gandhiji, he took a piece of paper and divided the group of lawyers into pairs and he put down the order which lawyer would go to which court. And each pair was to court arrest. So they were ready to go to jail. So Gandhiji made a pair that with who would go to the jail. Several days later, Gandhi received a written communication from the magistrate informing him that the lieutenant governor of the province had ordered the case to be dropped. So after several days, Gandhiji received a written communication later from the magistrate and he was informed that the lieutenant governor of the province had ordered the case against Mahatma Gandhiji for breaking that, for disobeying the order to leave Champaran was to be dropped. Civil disobedience had triumphed. So in this way, the civil disobedience movement, which was started by Mahatma Gandhiji, had succeeded. Triumph means succeeded. The first time in modern India. So it was the first time that the civil disobedience movement, which Mahatma Gandhi started, had succeeded. Gandhi and the lawyers now proceeded to conduct a far-flung inquiry into the grievances of the farmers. So Gandhiji and the prominent lawyers now started a procedure to conduct a far-flung inquiry. Far-flung means spread. Far-flung means spread over a wide area. Long inquiry, we can say that, into a grievances, into the complaint. Grievances means complaints, because whatever loss the farmer has, complained against the unfairness, because the British landlords, they were unjust to the peasants. So grievances. So they started the procedure to conduct inquiry into the grievances of the peasants. Depositions by about 10,000 peasants were written down and notes made on the other evidence. Deposition means formal statement. So formal statements were collected from the 10,000 peasants. So statements were collected from the 10,000 peasants and notes even made on other evidence. So before filing a case against the British landlord, Mahatma Gandhiji, he made the thousands of peasants to write their complaints, to write their statements, even notes even made on the other evidences. Documents were collected, even documents were also collected, strengthening the case of the peasants. The whole area throbbed with the activity of the investigators and the vehement protest of the landlords. So the whole area of the Motihari throbbed, means pulsated with the activity of the investigators and the vehement means forceful protest of the landlords. In June, Gandhi was summoned to Sir Edward Gate, the lieutenant governor. So in the month of June, Gandhiji was called to present before Sir Edward Gate, the lieutenant governor. Before he went, he met leading associates and again laid detailed plans for civil disobedience if he should not return. So before going to meet the Lieutenant Governor, Mahatma Gandhi he met leading associates, his lawyer, and again he led detailed plans for the civil disobedience if he should not return and if he had to go to jail. Gandhiji had four protracted interviews. Protracted means long interview, detailed interviews lasting longer. So Gandhiji had a four protracted means long interviews with the Lieutenant Governor, who as a result appointed an official commission of inquiry into the Indigo sharecroppers situation. So Mahatma Gandhiji and Lieutenant Governor had a four long interview, and at the outcome of the interview, the Lieutenant Governor was convinced that injustice was done to the peasants, and as a result of it, Lieutenant Governor appointed an official committee, inquiry committee, into the Indigo sharecroppers situation. The commission consisted of landlords, government officials, and Gandhi as the sole representative of the peasants. The commission, which was appointed by Lieutenant Governor against the injustice, included the landlords, government officials, and Gandhi was the only representative of the peasant. Gandhi remained in Champaran for an initial uninterrupted period of 7 months and then again for several shorter visits. So Mahatma Gandhiji he remained in Champaran for an initial or starting uninterrupted without going back to Ahmedabad for 7 continuous months, and then again he made a shorter visit to Champaran. The visit undertaken casually on the entreaty of an unlettered peasants in the expectation that it would last a few days occupied almost a year of Gandhi's life. So Mahatma Gandhiji had made a visit of Champaran, which was casually with the request, entreaty means humble request, made by the unlettered peasant, uneducated peasants. They expected that this visit would last for a few days, but it occupied almost a year of Gandhi's life. So the Champaran episode occupied almost a year of Gandhi's life. So he remained in Champaran for almost a year to solve the case against the peasants. The official inquiry assembled a crushing mountain of evidence against the big planters, and when they saw this, they agreed in principle to make refunds to the peasants. So the official inquiry collected a crushing mountain of evidence. They collected a big amount of evidence, proof against the big planter, against the big landlords, British landlords. So this official inquiry found that the injustice was done against the peasants by the landlords on the basis of the evidence, proof in the form of the formal statement, documents, and other evidence. And when they saw this, and when they saw these documents, evidence, proof of injustice, they agreed in principle to make refunds. So they give the judgment that the peasants should be given refunds by the British landlords. But how much must we pay? They asked. So the British landlord, they asked Mahatma Gandhiji, the British official commission, they asked Mahatma Gandhi, how much must we pay? How much refund they must pay to the peasants? They thought he would demand repayment in full of the money which they had illegally and deceitfully extorted from the sharecroppers. The British landlord thought that Mahatma Gandhiji would demand a repayment or refund 100% in full of the money which the landlord had illegally and deceitfully means here fraudulently. Deceitfully means dishonestly, cheating. Extorted is to obtain by threatening from the sharecroppers. He asked only 50%, but Mahatma Gandhi surprisingly he asked the refund of 50%. There he seemed adamant, writes Reverend J. Hodge, a British missionary in Champaran, who observed the entire episode at close range. So, according to the respected J. Hodge, a British missionary who observed the entire Champaran episode very closely, he believed that Mahatma Gandhiji, he seemed adamant when Mahatma Gandhiji asked for 50% of refund, thinking probably that he would not give way. The representative of the planters offered to refund the extent of 25%, and to his amazement, Mr. Gandhi took him at this word, thus breaking the deadlock. So, the landlord, British landlord, thought that probably Mahatma Gandhi would not surrender, he would not give way, he would not be agreed to pay 50%. The representative of the planters were offered to refund to the extent of 25%. The peasants were offered only 25%. So they thought that Mahatma Gandhi would not give way. But to their surprise, they were amazed when Mahatma Gandhiji to agreed to the planter, agreed to the British landlord, thus breaking the deadlock. In this way, the stalemate reached to the agreement. So it was decided, the agreement was made that the British landlord would pay 25% of the refund which was collected illegally by the landlord. This settlement was adopted unanimously by the commission. So the settlement made between the landlord and the peasants adopted unanimously with the agreement of all by the commission. Gandhi explained that the amount of the refund was less important than the fact that the landlords had been obliged to surrender part of the money and with it part of their prestige. So some of the peasants they refused to get a refund of 25%. But when Mahatma Gandhiji explained to them that the amount of the refund was less important than the fact that the landlord had been forced to surrender the part of the money, and with that they also surrender the part of their prestige. So money was not important. So the British landlord were forced to surrender their prestige status. Therefore, as far as the peasants were concerned, the planters had behaved as lords above the law. So Mahatma Gandhiji explained to them that as far as the peasants were concerned, the British landlords had behaved as lords above the law. But now, as they had surrendered not only the amount 25% refund, but also along with that they also surrendered their prestige. So now they are not the lords above the law, they have to obey the law. Now the peasant saw that he had rights and defenders, and now the peasants, those who are without any rights, now they saw that he had rights and even defenders in the form of Mahatma Gandhiji. He learned courage, and in this way the peasants got the courage to fight against the British landlords, against the injustice. event justified Gandhiji's position. Within a few years, the British planters abandoned their estates, which reverted to the peasants. So, within a few years, the British planters, as the prestige, as they lost their prestige against the peasants, so they felt ashamed of themselves. They felt ashamed of themselves, and as a result of it, the British planters they left their estates and which reverted, which were restored, which were given back to the peasants. Indigo sharecropping disappeared, and this way, the indigo sharecropping, the settlement, the ancient agreement disappeared, and the peasants became the owner of the land. Gandhiji never contented himself with large political or economic solution. Gandhiji never satisfied. Contented means satisfied. He was never himself satisfied with large political or economic solution. He saw the cultural and social backwardness in Champaran village and wanted to do something about it immediately. When Mahatma Gandhiji was in Champaran for the whole year, he found that the people of Champaran they were backward culturally and socially, and Mahatma Gandhiji wanted to do something about this backwardness immediately. As a result, he appealed for teachers. So Mahatma Gandhiji wanted to remove the cultural and social backwardness. So he appealed to the teachers to come forward and to give them education. So he requested teachers to come forward. Mahadev Desai and Narhari Parikh, two young men who had just joined Gandhi as disciple, and their wives volunteered for the work. So Mahatma Gandhi's request was accepted by Mahadev Desai and Narhari Parikh, two young men who had just joined Gandhi as disciple, and along with them they were accompanied by their wives, those who ready to volunteer for the work. Several more came from Bombay, Pune and other distant parts of the land. So the request made by Mahatma Gandhiji and along with the Mahadev Bhai Desai and Narendra Parikh, several more volunteers came from different parts of India like Bombay, Pune and other distant part of the land to remove the cultural and social backwardness from Champaran. Devdas, Gandhi's youngest son, arrived from ashram and so did Mrs. Gandhi. So not only teachers but also Mahatma Gandhi's son, youngest son, Devdas Gandhi, he also arrived from the ashram of Ahmedabad, and Mrs. Gandhi, Kasturba, she also came to Champaran for the removal of cultural and social backwardness. Primary schools were opened in 6 villages. So first of all, Mahatma Gandhiji wanted to educate the people of Champaran, and for that purpose, primary schools were started in 6 villages. Kasturbai taught the ashram rules of personal cleanliness and community sanitation. So Mahatma Gandhiji found that the Champaran village was not clean, dirty, filthy. So Kasturbai was given the task, and Kasturbai taught the people the ashram rules on personal cleanliness, health and hygiene, and community sanitation. She emphasized the health and hygiene of the people of Champaran. Even health conditions were miserable. Not only the people of Champaran were backward culturally, but also socially, but also they were not healthy. So health conditions was also poor, miserable in Champaran. So Gandhiji got a doctor to volunteer his services for 6 months. So Gandhiji requested some doctors to come forward who could volunteer for this service for 6 months. Three medicines were available: castor oil, quinine, and sulfur ointment. So the doctors, they prescribed three medicines: castor oil, quinine, and sulfur ointment. Anybody who showed a spotted tongue was given a dose of castor oil. So in Champaran, any person, anybody who was suffering from coated tongue was given a dose of castor oil. Anybody with malaria, anybody who was suffering from malaria fever received quinine plus castor oil. And anybody with skin eruption received ointment plus castor oil. In this way, three medicines were available and were given to the people, those who are suffering from different diseases. Gandhi noticed the filthy state of women's clothes. So Gandhiji also noticed the very filthy, very dirty state, miserable condition of women's clothes. The women of Champaran, they didn't have even clothes to wear. He asked Kasturbai to talk to them about it. So Mahatma Gandhiji asked his wife Kasturbai to talk to the women, those who were living in a filthy state, those who didn't have the clothes, proper clothes to wear. One woman took Kasturbai into her hut and said, "Look, there is no box or cupboard here for clothes." So one woman of Champaran took Kasturbai into her hut and she showed to Kasturbai that there was no cupboard or box for the clothes. The sari I am wearing is the only one I have. Even the woman also showed to Kasturbai that even the sari which she was wearing is the only one she had. She didn't have another pair of sari. During his long stay in Champaran, Gandhi kept a long distance watch on the ashram. So Mahatma Gandhi, even though he stayed in Champaran for 1 year, but he kept a close eye, he kept a long distance watch on the ashram. He sent regular instruction by mail and asked for financial accounts. Mahatma Gandhi, even though he was in Champaran, he sent regularly instruction by post, by mail, and even asked for financial accounts. Once he wrote to the residents that it was time to fill in the old latrine trenches and dig new one, otherwise the old ones would begin to smell bad. So once Mahatma Gandhi also wrote to the residents that of ashram that now it was time to fill in the old latrine trenches and dig new ones, otherwise the old ones would begin to smell bad. So in this way, Mahatma Gandhi was the advocate of health and hygiene. Even though he was in Champaran, he wanted the sanitation, cleanliness of the ashram. The Champaran episode was a turning point in Gandhi's life. What I did, he explained, was a very ordinary thing. So, the Champaran episode, how Mahatma Gandhi he gave justice, the peasants of Champaran was a turning point in his life. Mahatma Gandhi explained that what he did was a very ordinary thing, and I declared that the British could not order me about in my own country. So Mahatma Gandhi he explained that whatever he did for the peasant was a very ordinary thing, and he declared that the Britishers could not order him about in his own country. The Britisher could not order him to leave Champaran because he was also Indian. But Champaran didn't begin as an act of defiance. But the Champaran episode didn't begin as an act of open defiance, open refusal to obey. It was grew out of an attempt to alleviate the distress of large numbers of poor peasants. The Champara episode didn't begin as an act of disobedience to the British authorities. It grew out, the Champara episode grew out of an attempt to alleviate, to uplift the distress of the large number of poor peasants. So this episode was started by Mahatma Gandhi to free the peasants from the clutches of the British landlord, those who were doing injustice to them by forcing them to grow 15% on the land, the indigo, and they forced them to surrender it, the harvest, as a rent. So it was an attempt to elevate means to ease, to make less severe the distress, the suffering of large number of poor peasants. This was the typical Gandhiji's pattern. So this was the typical pattern of Gandhiji, that his politics were intervened, mixed with the practical. Gandhiji, not only he wanted political freedom, but also he wanted the cultural, social freedom of the people of India. Practical, day-to-day problems. He, along with giving them justice, along with fighting for the rights of the people of India, he also wanted to solve the day-to-day problems of the millions of Indians. His was not a loyalty to abstractions. So his was not a loyalty to abstractions. Abstractions means here general idea, not based on realities. So a general idea not based on realities. Kalpnik vichar, imagination. His was not a loyalty to imagination. It was general idea based on realities. It was a loyalty to living human beings. So Mahatma Gandhiji, that pattern was a loyalty to living human beings. He was loyal to the human beings. In everything Gandhi did, moreover, he tried to mold a new free India who could stand on his own feet and thus make India free. So, in everything Gandhi did, whatever Gandhiji did for the people, moreover, Mahatma Gandhiji, with his attempt, with his efforts, he tried to shape a new free Indian who could stand on his own feet. He tried to shape a new free Indian who could be independent and thus make India free. By making the people of India independent, he wanted to make India free. Early in the Champaran action, Charles Free Andrews, the English pacifist who had become a devoted follower of the Mahatma, came to bid Gandhiji farewell before going on a tour of duty to the Fiji island. So early in the Champaran action, so when the Champaran action was started in the initial stage, Charles Fred Andrews, who was an English pacifist, pacifist means the person believing in peace. So Charles Fred Andrews, who was an English pacifist who believed in peace, who had become a devoted follower of Mahatma Gandhiji. So Charles Fred Andrews, he came to bid Gandhiji farewell. So before going to a tour of the duty to the Fiji island, he wanted to meet Mahatma Gandhiji. So he wanted to say goodbye. So he came to Mahatma Gandhiji. Gandhi's lawyer friends thought it would be a good idea for Andrews to stay in Champaran and help them. So Mahatma Gandhi's lawyer friends, they thought it would be good idea for Andrews to stay in Champaran and help Mahatma Gandhiji. Andrew was willing. So Andrew was also ready to stay there and to help Mahatma Gandhiji. If Mahatma Gandhiji agreed, then he would stay there. But Gandhiji was vehemently opposed. But Gandhiji was he opposed vehemently, aggressively. He didn't want the interference of the Britishers. He said, you think that in this unequal fight, it would be helpful if we have an Englishman on our side. Mahatma Gandhiji, he told the lawyer that in this fight against the injustice of the peasants, it would be helpful if they had an Englishman on their side. This shows the weakness of your heart. So Mahatma Gandhiji, he explained to him that in this unequal fight, against the injustice of the poor peasants. It would be it would not be helpful if they had an Englishman on their side. By taking the Englishman on their side, they would become weak. It would show the weakness of their heart. So Mahatma Gandhi wanted to fight against the injustice independently without taking the support of the Britishers, any Britishers. The cause is just and you must rely upon yourselves to win the battle. Mahatma Gandhi even added that the cause is just and you must rely upon yourselves. Mahatma Gandhi believed that we must depend upon ourselves to win the battle instead of taking the support of anyone. We should fight our battle ourselves. You should not seek a prop in Mr. Andrews because he happens to be an Englishman. Mahatma Gandhi told his loyal friends that he should not seek he should not seek a prop. Prop means support. He should not ask a support to Mr. Andrews because Mr. Andrews happens to be an Englishman. In this way, Mahatma Gandhi he gave the example of self-reliance. He had read our minds correctly. Rajendra Prasad comments. Rajendra Prasad even comments that Mahatma Gandhi had read their minds correctly and we had no reply. The lawyers, the friend lawyers, they had no reply what Mahatma Gandhi had said to them. Gandhiji in this way taught us a lesson in self-reliance. So Gandhiji, by not taking the support of Charles Free Andrews, he taught them a lesson in self-reliance, independence, that we should be independent. Self-reliance, Indian independence, and help to sharecroppers were all bound together. So self-reliance, independence, Indian independence, and help to sharecroppers were all bound together, were all connected, were tied together. So in this way, Champaran episode was a turning point in Gandhi's life. I hope you have understood this chapter. Thank you.